posits that while shadowboxing fills the stage in Washington, D.C., a certain English gentleman, known as Lord Jacob Rothschild, head of the most powerful banking dynasty in the world, is busy building his personal project spanning the Eurasian continent, the Belt and Road Initiative, formerly known as One Belt, One Road. This massive infrastructure project was supposedly postulated in 2013 as a way to stimulate the world economy and lift Asia out of poverty. But it is in fact a central core plan, years in the making, setting up the Rothschild, City of London, East India Trading Company, New World Order economic system. The estimated cost is over $20 trillion through till 2030. China is where the spotlight is shone as the driving force, but Israel is the real centre of attention. This is the Bunting Cloverleaf Map. It is found within the Iran-Lahore map collection in the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem. A mosaic model of the map is installed on the fence of Safra Square at the site of Jerusalem City Hall. Jerusalem is in the centre of the map, surrounded by the three continents of Asia, Europe and Africa, comprising three leaves of a clover shape. The top right leaf shape, coloured in green, represents Asia. The top left one, coloured in red, represents Europe, and the bottom one, coloured in yellow, represents Africa. The three continents include captions of their various countries and illustrations of some of their cities. This map was drawn in 1581, depicting Jerusalem at the centre of the great pan-Eurasian trading routes, and this is exactly what the current-day Belt and Road Initiative seeks to establish, making Jerusalem and the long biblically prophesied Greater Israel the centre of trade, politics and culture, replacing the United States as the world's leading light and the human race's bright, shining destiny. North America is depicted in part off to the side, labelled the New World, a seeming unrelated sideshow to the main game of dominating the Eurasian landmass, certainly true of the 1600s and ironically ever truer in the year 2018. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski published his seminal work, The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. Brzezinski had a distinguished career as Professor of American Policy at Johns Hopkins University before becoming the United States National Security Advisor during 1977 to 1981 under the administration of President Jimmy Carter. In his book, Brzezinski notes, Eurasia is thus the chessboard in which the struggle for global primacy continues to be played, and that struggle involves geostrategy, the strategic management of geopolitical interests. It is noteworthy that as recently as 1940, two aspirants to global power, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, agreed explicitly in the secret negotiations of November of that year that America should be excluded from Eurasia. Each realised that the injection of American power into Eurasia would preclude his ambitions regarding global domination. Each shared the assumption that Eurasia is the centre of the world and that he who controls Eurasia controls the world. Halford John Mackinder in 1904 stated the same with his Heartland theory and his paper The Geographical Pivot of History, where he surmised his work in the interesting year of 1919. Who rules East Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. And so, in the present day, after two devastating wars based in Europe and Russia, and a Cold War spanning the globe, we see an unfolding battle to control the Eurasian landmass and put Jerusalem at the centre of a new world order. The future Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, stated in 1924 after visiting the Soviet Union, quote, "I'm a Bolshevik." We will be delving deeply into the founding of Israel by Polish and Russian communist Jews later, but just to give you a taste of what is to come, let me quote a little more, as you may find what I quote hard to believe. The quote, "I'm a Bolshevik," comes from an Israeli press article by journalist Tom Segev. Dated March 2013, Segev writes the title, "The USSR is our second homeland," said one kibbutznik when Stalin died. Incredible as it may seem, Stalin's Soviet Union was once at the centre of Israeli identity. Let us quote extensively as will set the tone for the whole video. Listen carefully. The death notice published in the Daily Al-Hamishmah on May 6, 1953 quickly became one of the most cited documents in the history of Israeli politics. The United Workers' Party, it said, was shocked upon hearing of the great disaster that befell the peoples of the Soviet Union. The world's proletariat and all of progressive humanity with the loss of the great leader and illustrious military commander, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. The Soviet dictator was described there as a great revolutionary fighter, responsible for immense historic endeavours. But contrary to what is usually remembered, the appellation Son of the Nations, as supporters like to refer to Stalin, did not appear in the paper's announcement. 60 years later, the death notice could be seen on David Seller's Nostalgia website, as if it merits only amused wistfulness. In fact, it is of interest to recall, incredible as it may seem, that Stalin's Soviet Union was once at the centre of Israeli identity. In the first Knesset, the left-wing Mapam, or United Workers' Party, was the second largest faction with 19 seats. During the debate over the makeup of the government that was held in the Knesset on March 10, 1949, one of Mapam's two leaders, Yaakov Hassan and Kibbutz Mishma Hachmek, said, "For us, the Soviet Union is the fortress of world socialism. It is our second homeland, the socialist one." That comment could go down as one of the 10 most quoted sentences in the history of Israeli politics. I was not happy when Hassan voiced that sentiment, wrote Meir Yahari, Mapam's senior leader, a year later, although he went on to describe the People's Republic of China as a dictatorship that safeguards democracy there, adding, "This is the doctrine we have been nurturing for decades." Juicy. The article goes on. They were not the only ones harbouring such sentiments, of course. David Ben-Gurion returned in 1923 from a visit to the Soviet Union and declared, "I am a Bolshevik." Moreover, many of this country's early inhabitants were Russian-born. They spoke Russian, read books and sang songs in Russian, and thought and dreamed in Russian. Many of them owed their lives to the Red Army's war against Nazi Germany. Stalin was considered the father of the victory over Hitler. The communists here had it easier. All they had to do was listen to Radio Moscow. Zionist socialists had a hard time living with the murderousness of the Son of the Nations and with communist-tainted anti-Semitism. Wrangling over whether to be sympathetic or disapproving split communities and destroyed families. The two great leaders of Mapam wrote a bevy of letters back and forth that were kept for posterity. They are enlightening, and we'll quote a summary of the rest of the article. It seems that Yahari saw in Hassan's criticism of the Soviet Union a betrayal of their friendship. And, for his part, Hassan wrote in a most conciliatory tone, assuring his colleague that, "I am certain the Soviet Union is not a dead planet. I am certain a day will come when there too the sun of true socialist liberty will shine in all its essence. Then the objective historian will come along and explain that what happened during Stalin's era and what is happening there today were stages en route to the future, just as the beheadings of Georges Jacques Danton was also one of the links on the way to victory of the Great French Revolution." Journalist Tom Segev ends the article with this last line. Yahari died in 1987, aged 90. Hassan passed away in 1992 at 93. Plenty of years in which to admit countless times that he had erred in describing the Soviet Union as a second homeland. I gather after the quotes from the above article you will begin to sense where this documentary is heading and are already pondering the ramifications of Israel and the United States being so close.
There's no press here, you know?
No, very little. We get very little. They don't like covering us.
But they like you in a very special way.
They like us. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have Prime Minister Netanyahu and Mrs. Netanyahu with us. They've been friends for a long time. We have, I would say, probably the best relationships right now with Israel that we ever had. I think we're as close now as maybe ever before.
Trust me, it gets better. Here's another Ben-Gurion quote. Later, in 1962 in Life magazine, Ben-Gurion is quoted, "The image of the world in 1987 is traced in my imagination. The Cold War would be a thing of the past. Internal pressure of the constantly growing intelligentsia in Russia for more freedom and the pressure of the masses for raising their living standards may lead to a gradual democratization of the Soviet Union. On the other hand, the increasing influence of the workers and farmers and the rising political importance of men of science may transform the United States into a welfare state with a planned economy. Western and Eastern Europe will become a federation of autonomous states having a socialist and democratic regime. With the exception of the USSR as a federated Eurasian state, all other continents will become united in a world alliance at whose disposal will be an international police force. All armies will be abolished and there will be no more wars. In Jerusalem, the United Nations will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federated union of all continents. This will be the seat of the Supreme Court of mankind to settle all controversies among the federated continents, as prophesied by Isaiah. With the above in mind, the emerging close relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Xi Jinping of China becomes more obvious. Understanding the central role of the Belt and Road Initiative to unfolding events, particularly in the Middle East, the Trump administration's main role becomes clearer in facilitating the final establishment of Greater Israel and the transfer of the US high technology sector to Tel Aviv. This transfer of technology is occurring in the same manner as US heavy industry and manufacturing were moved to China and Asia beginning under the Nixon administration. Interestingly, the same people are involved, most notably Henry Kissinger and the Council on Foreign Relations, along with a bevy of young 20-somethings at the time that included, ironically, Roger Stone and Dr. Steve Pieczenik, players directly involved in bringing Donald Trump to power and keeping him there.
They are very similar in the sense that they're both brilliant, they're both combative, neither one is afraid to take on the media, that they appeal to the forgotten man, the silent majority, the blue-collar white Democrat that was part of the Nixon coalition, is now part of the Trump coalition. Ironically, it was former President Nixon who was, to my mind, the very first person who saw the possibilities of a Trump presidency. He met Donald Trump in George Steinbrenner's box in 1987 at a Yankees game, and the former president called me the next morning and said, "Well, I met your man. He's really got it. This guy could go all the way."
And Donald Trump, like Richard Nixon, cannot wait to hand billions in trade and technology to other countries, especially Israel, who is totally in bed with China. Every time the Don slaps a couple of $100 billion in tariffs and limits trade with China, in steps Israel with stolen US technology, and the trading bloc of Russia, China, Israel and the Belt and Road Initiative draw ever closer. This includes Turkey, who actually makes parts for the Lockheed crown jewel of technology, the F-35, as does Israel. Now they are all drawing closer together thanks to the Trump administration's policy making that clearly benefits Trump's owner, Netanyahu, and the Israeli First crowd. Pieczenik is of particular interest due to his incredible credentials, membership of the Council of Foreign Relations up until at least 2012, and employment as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Henry Kissinger, Cyrus Vance and James Baker. In early 2018, Dr. Steve Pieczenik said this.
What are you seeing here?
Well, I'm glad you feel the storm come, but quite frankly, the storm was over a year ago when we brought in Trump. What you're seeing now is basically the aftermath of a major storm that had occurred with no one really understanding how Trump came in and how we and the intelligence community and others had helped to bring Trump to the forefront. The storm is over. Hillary is over. Mueller's over. The FBI is over. The CIA, certain elements are over. That's why Pompeo, who was number one at West Point, was put in. We have several military generals in charge. We have every congressional district. We have a military installation or project. So basically, we're not worried about any Democrats or congressmen. If you look at the map of the United States, we in the intelligence and military community are basically in charge, and Trump is on top of that. And I'm not upset about it, and I'll tell you why.
Despite Pieczenik working closely with Alex Jones and Roger Stone, his name is never, ever mentioned in the mainstream media. This must be examined closely. With Trump mirroring Nixon, prone to say one thing and do another, we find Nixon making his name as a red-baiting ally of Senator Joseph McCarthy, but as president, he opened relations with Communist China. Nixon ran for president based on a Southern strategy of appealing to the white devotees of Jim Crow, but his administration backed affirmative action. Nixon made his name as a conservative but presided over the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and expansion of the welfare state. And just like Nixon, the narrative presented in this video contends that Trump will talk a conservative pro-America talk while handing billions in contracts to Israel in a manufactured trade war with China. His aides and associates will talk an anti-communist talk.
China is in control of everything in America, but it's definitely being directed from China, and they plan to kill Trump in March. I thought I would just let people know that Fort Bragg's preparing for that.
Whilst facilitating the rise of Greater Israel in the same manner Nixon facilitated the rise of China. If there is one thing you will easily take from this documentary, is that Israel is a Russian client state, not an American one, and though the levels of control are debatable, Israel has always been a Soviet-era invention and backdoor to the West. Now, why haven't I heard about these Russian Soviet-era spy rings in Israel? No CNN or Alex Jones coverage here. And with Israel playing such a central role in the US high-technology industry, filled with Soviet-era missile and aeronautical engineers, you can bet Elbit Systems, who is building major componentry for Lockheed's crown jewel, the F-35, is not full of alleged Jews from Yemen, Morocco, or Ethiopia. It's full of alleged Jews from Russia. Ask Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, an alleged Jew from Russia who is widely considered a Soviet-era KGB asset by various commentators in Israel. Ask him. He loves the F-35. Even WikiLeaks revealed how close he is to Putin. But don't worry, my US taxpayer friends, I'm sure Lockheed and the US Defense Department considered all these things before handing over the best US taxpayer dollars could design and build to Israel. And Russia. And China. And Iran. And big to India. You get the picture. No wonder Putin is smiling, as is President of China Xi Jinping and even Rouhani in Iran.
My administration is reclaiming America's heritage as the world's greatest spacefaring nation.
And now, with Trump under orders from his handler Bibi, building a US Space Command without the grassroots support of the DoD and Secretary of Defense Mattis, you can bet the Israeli space industry is going to move along in leaps and bounds. And coincidentally, so will the Russian high-technology space sector. Well, what do you know? So is the Chinese high-technology space sector. They sure did hit the trifecta with those close relationships with Israel, didn't they? You better hope Mattis is everything the mainstream media alludes he is, a break or preferably a smack to the head of Bibi's boy Trump. Maybe Alex Jones will tell us all about it, Israel that is.
Who are we preparing to go to war against or defend ourselves from?
Senator, the Secretary of Defense outlined in the National Defense Strategy the challenges that we face. Part of the emphasis in the strategy was the shift from a focus on terrorism to great power competition, with a particular emphasis on the long-term challenges of China and Russia. It refers to both of those as opportunities for peaceful competition, deterrence, and then the ability to prevail in a conflict should we have to. The strategy is both a classified and unclassified option, but it lays out and goes through the challenges that we face.
So we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars defending ourselves from China, while major corporation after major corporation is shutting down in the United States of America and moving to China. Anything incongruous about that?
This is an emergency transmission from deep in the heart of Texas. The U.S. resistance against a global corporate combine empowered and funded by Communist China, allied with the big mega banks that set up Communist China in 1949. The Communist Chinese have taken control of U.S. telecommunications infrastructure. The Communist Chinese have taken control of Hollywood. The Communist Chinese have taken control of the main universities. This is all confirmed. This is not a drill. Big tech in Silicon Valley is almost completely run by the Communist Chinese government.
No, not quite yet. He's still on the Chinese communists. You never know. He may take the next step. And finally, what of America? Where will America sit at the end of all this, and how did it get from world superpower to teetering on the edge of economic and societal collapse?
Give us